We have a situation out here, requesting immediate backup, Route 17 North. I repeat, immediate backup.
The radio crackled once. Not words, just breathing. Officer Daniel Mercer slowed the cruiser to a crawl, headlights slicing through falling snow like a knife dragged across gauze. The road ahead was empty, a rural highway sealed off by winter, trees leaning inward as if listening. The breathing came again. Slow, wet, close. Daniel glanced at the dashboard. The radio light flickered green, then red, then green again. "Dispatch," he said. Nothing answered. Only the sound of someone inhaling. Too deep, like lungs filling with something heavy. Daniel checked the rearview mirror. For half a second, he thought he saw movement in the back seat. He turned sharply. Empty. Snow whispered against the windows. The engine hummed. The radio exhaled. A sudden burst of static ripped through the car, loud enough to make him flinch. Then a voice came through, thin, distorted. "Officer, you shouldn't be there." Daniel's hand tightened around the wheel. "Identify yourself," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. Silence. The radio clicked off by itself. The road ahead vanished into white. That was when he noticed something impossible. Fresh footprints in the snow, leading toward his cruiser, and stopping directly beside the driver's door. Winter shifts always felt longer than they were. Officer Daniel Mercer learned that in his first year on patrol, when the cold taught him how time could stretch and thin at the same time. Minutes dragged. Hours vanished. The world shrank to whatever his headlights touched, and everything beyond that glow felt unreal, like it could change the moment he looked away. The road ahead was empty. Not quiet. Empty was different. Snow fell steadily, not heavy enough to blind him, just thick enough to erase detail. Fence lines dissolved into white. Trees became silhouettes without depth. The cruiser's tires hummed low, steady, the sound almost soothing if he didn't think too hard about how alone it made him feel. Daniel flexed his fingers inside his gloves. Cold had a way of creeping in through the smallest gaps. He checked the clock. 2:13 a.m. The winter shift always peaked around then. Not in activity, in unease. That strange hour where nothing happened, but everything felt close to happening. The radio sat quiet. Too quiet. Dispatch usually filled the gaps with status checks or idle chatter. Tonight there was nothing. No background noise. No distant voices bleeding through other channels. Just silence. Daniel adjusted the volume. The radio crackled once, like it was waking up, then settled again. He exhaled slowly and focused on the road. He had driven this stretch hundreds of times. North Patrol, county line, nothing but abandoned land and a handful of stubborn residents who refused to move even when the town pulled services years ago. Locals said the place swallowed things. Cars. Animals. Sometimes people. Daniel didn't believe that. He believed in neglect. In roads that didn't get plowed. In response times that stretched too long when the weather turned bad. Still, his eyes kept drifting to the tree lane. A sound broke the rhythm. Not loud. Not sudden. A soft hiss. Daniel frowned and glanced down. The radio light flickered. Green. Red. Green. The hiss became something else. Breathing. Daniel stiffened. It wasn't static. It wasn't interference. It had shape to it. A slow inhale, a wet pause, a long trembling exhale. Someone was on the line. Dispatch. Daniel said. The word felt small inside the cruiser. The breathing continued. Daniel slowed the cruiser, scanning the roadside. No vehicles. No flares. No figures waving for help. Unit 12 requesting confirmation, he said, firmer this time. The breathing stopped. For a moment, he thought it was over. Just equipment acting up in the cold. Then a voice slipped through the speaker. Low. Distorted. Close. You hear it too, don't you? Daniel's stomach tightened. Identify yourself, he said. Silence answered him. The radio clicked off. Daniel pulled the cruiser to the shoulder and shut off the engine. The sudden quiet pressed in. broken only by the faint ticking of cooling metal. Snow brushed against the windshield. He sat there listening. Nothing. After a few seconds, he shook his head. Winter did this. Fatigue plus silence equaled imagination. He reached to turn the key, and noticed the headlights were already on. He hadn't turned them off. A prickle crawled up his spine. Daniel stepped out of the cruiser. Cold slapped his face hard enough to sting. His boots crunched into fresh snow, and the sound felt unnaturally loud in the stillness. That's when he saw the footprints. They came from the tree lane. Straight, deliberate steps toward the driver's side door. Bare feet. The impressions were deep, toes splayed, as if the person had pressed their weight down slowly before moving again. Daniel followed them with his flashlight, breath fogging thick in front of him. The prints stopped beside the cruiser. No sign of where the person had gone next. No drag marks. No collapse. Just an abrupt ending, as if whoever made them had simply ceased to exist. "Hello," Daniel called. The word vanished into the trees. He turned back toward the cruiser. The driver's door was ajar. He was certain he'd closed it. His hand drifted toward his weapon as he approached, every step measured. The interior light glowed softly, illuminating the empty front seat. The radio turned on by itself. Breathing filled the cabin again. Slower now. Closer. Daniel leaned in just enough to see the dashboard clearly. The radio display showed an incoming signal. No channel number. No source. Just a blinking cursor. Then the breathing stopped, replaced by a single, whisper-thin sentence. "You weren't supposed to stop." Daniel slammed the door shut and staggered back, heart hammering. He stared at the cruiser like it might open again on its own. The radio went dead. Snow kept falling. Daniel stood there longer than he meant to, the cold gnawing at his bones, a realization settling heavily in his chest. Whatever had contacted him wasn't lost. It wasn't confused. It knew the road. It knew the shift. And it knew him well enough to wait. When Daniel finally got back into the cruiser and drove on, he didn't look in the mirror. He didn't need to. He could feel it. Something moving just outside the edge of his headlights, keeping pace, patient. And somewhere behind the silence, a radio was already preparing to speak again. The first thing Daniel noticed was that the radio no longer waited for him to touch it. It woke on its own. Sometimes it hissed softly when he drove past mile marker 17. Sometimes it clicked once like a tongue against teeth. And sometimes, usually when the snow thickened and the world narrowed to white and black, it whispered just loud enough to make him doubt whether he'd really heard it at all. By the third night after the footprints, Daniel stopped reporting the incidents. Not because they stopped happening, because every time he tried, the words felt wrong in his mouth. Unreal. Like he was trying to explain a dream that slipped apart the moment he spoke it aloud. He told himself he needed sleep. He told himself winter shifts were known for messing with perception. But the logs didn't lie. Calls were appearing on his screen that dispatch swore they hadn't sent. Coordinates repeating. Same stretch of dead road. Same timestamps, always between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. Once, the call description was a single word. Listening. Daniel stared at it for a long time before clearing the call. The caretaker's office smelled like dust and old heat. Harlan sat behind the desk, hunched forward, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold long ago. The man had been with the department longer than anyone could remember. Long enough that nobody questioned why he still worked nights even though his badge had been retired for years. "You look like hell," Harlan said without looking up. Daniel closed the door behind him. Radio acting strange. Harlan asked quietly. Daniel paused. "How many winter shifts have you worked?" he asked instead. Harlan's mouth twitched. "Enough." Daniel stepped closer. "Have you ever heard breathing over the radio?" Harlan's grip tightened on the mug. "Don't say it out loud," he murmured. Daniel felt something sink in his chest. "So you have." Harlan finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with something that wasn't just age. "They don't like being noticed," Harlan said. "Who doesn't?" Harlan hesitated. Then, the calls. Daniel waited. Harlan leaned back, chair creaking. You know why the north route never stays staffed? Budget, Daniel said. Harlan gave a humorless smile. That's the excuse. He reached into a drawer and slid a thin folder across the desk. No label. Inside were photocopied reports, incident logs, partial transcripts, handwritten notes in different inks and handwriting styles. Names Daniel recognized. Some crossed out. Some circled. All winter shifts. All North Patrol. All incomplete. One report caught Daniel's eye. Officer status. Unknown. Weather conditions. Blizzard. Final transmission. Breathing. Daniel swallowed. What happened? He asked. Harlan shook his head slowly. No one knows. Or no one agrees. Daniel looked up. Try me. Harlan stared at the door, as if making sure it was closed. Years back, he said. Before your time, there was a transport. Daniel's stomach tightened. Prisoner pickup from out of county, Harlan continued. Man accused of killing drivers during snowstorms. Lured them off the road. Used distress signals. Fake calls. Daniel had heard fragments of that case in the academy. Urban legend stuff. They caught him, Harlan said. Barely. Put him in the back of a cruiser during a whiteout. What happened? The storm closed in. Radios started acting up. Dispatch lost contact. Harlan's voice dropped. But other officers started hearing him. Daniel frowned. Hearing who? Harlan didn't answer immediately. They say the prisoner never stopped talking, he finally said. Not even when he shouldn't have been able to. Daniel left the office with the folder tucked under his arm and a pressure building behind his eyes. That night, the road felt closer than ever. The trees pressed inward, branches heavy with snow. The cruiser's headlights seemed weaker, like the darkness was swallowing the light faster than it should. The radio came alive. Static. Then a voice. Not distorted. Clear. Officer Mercer. Daniel's breath hitched. Who is this? He demanded. Silence. Then, you're driving too slow. Daniel accelerated. The speedometer climbed. The voice chuckled softly. Doesn't matter, it said. You'll end up here anyway. The GPS screen flickered. Coordinates appeared. The same ones from the night before. Daniel swerved off the road and stopped. The engine stalled. Snow fell harder, thicker, muting sound until the world felt padded and unreal. The radio whispered, "Get out." Daniel didn't move. He thought of the footprints, of the breathing, of the files filled with half-finished sentences and officers who never made it back. I'm not playing this game, he said. The radio crackled. Neither are we. Something brushed the back of the cruiser. Daniel spun, heart pounding. Another sound followed, a soft knock. From the trunk. Daniel drew his weapon. Police, he shouted. Show yourself. The knock came again. Slow. Patient. Daniel forced himself to open the trunk. It was empty. But the smell hit him immediately. Cold air mixed with something old and metallic. Blood. Frozen into the seams. Daniel slammed the trunk shut and staggered back. The radio screamed. Not static. Voices. Dozens of them, overlapping, panicked, whispering, pleading. Can you hear me? Dispatch, he's still breathing. Don't stop, don't stop. Daniel fell to his knees. Hands clamped over his ears. The voices faded all at once. Silence rushed in. When he looked up, he wasn't alone. Figures stood at the edge of the trees. Not solid. Not clear. Shadows shaped like people who had once worn uniforms. One stepped forward. Its voice came from the radio. You always think you're different, it said. Daniel staggered back into the cruiser and locked the doors. His reflection stared at him from the windshield. It blinked a second too late. Days blurred together. Daniel stopped going home. He slept in the station, lights on. He flinched at every radio chirp, every distant siren. Other officers noticed. You okay, Mercer? One asked. Daniel almost told him. Almost. But when he opened his mouth, the radio on the officer's belt crackled softly. Breathing. The officer frowned. Weird, he muttered. Must be interference. Daniel said nothing. He started seeing patterns. Snowfall always preceded the calls. The temperature drop. The hour. The stretch of road. It wasn't random. It was scheduled. A rotation. And every winter, someone drew the short straw. Daniel dreamed of the transport. Saw it from inside the back seat. Chains rattling. Snow roaring outside. Officers shouting into radios that refused to answer. He woke with the words echoing in his head. Someone has to listen. The breaking point came when dispatch called him directly. Unit 12, the voice said. We have an active distress signal. Daniel stared at the screen. Coordinates. Mile marker 17. Caller ID, Unit 12. That's me, Daniel whispered. Yes, dispatch replied calmly. That's why you're closest. Daniel felt something settle deep inside him. A certainty colder than fear. The horror wasn't hunting him. It was training him. Preparing him. Because the road didn't want victims. It wanted officers. And Winter was patient enough to wait until one of them answered willingly. The blizzard came without warning. Visibility dropped to nothing in seconds. The snow filling every corner of the world. Daniel's cruiser crept along the north route, headlights barely slicing through the white. Wind howled, rattling the frame, and the radio screamed in bursts of static and low whispers. Every nerve in his body was taut, every shadow suspicious. The coordinates dispatch had sent were burned into his GPS, overriding his attempts to change course. They led him to a frozen intersection, a stretch of road so barren it might as well have been a void. At the center sat a cruiser, half buried in snow. Its lights flashed weakly, orange and blue cutting through the storm. Daniel slowed to a crawl, breath fogging in the cab, hand hovering over his weapon. He stepped out, cold lancing through his coat, and approached the abandoned cruiser. The radio screamed again, overlapping static with whispers. Then it became one voice, unmistakable and close. Unit 12, it said. Calm. Patient. Knowing. Daniel froze. The back door of the cruiser was ajar. He eased it open. Inside sat a man. Not a suspect. Not a phantom. Not someone alive in the usual sense. His skin was gray, pale as frostbite, eyes unervingly aware, too focused, and somehow too calm. A smile stretched across his face, thin and humorless. You're late, he said, tilting his head as if Daniel had walked into a long-awaited meeting. Daniel's hand moved to his holster, shaking slightly. Who are you? What is this? The man chuckled, low and hollow, like ice breaking under weight. Every winter, someone wears the badge. Every winter, someone listens. Tonight, it's your turn. The world seemed to twist. Snow swirled in impossible patterns. The streetlights overhead warped and elongated. Daniel felt his pulse accelerate in ways his body shouldn't allow, his senses betraying him. The radio on his shoulder chirped again. He flinched as the same voice, distorted, endless, issued a single command. Step out. He refused. Another knock from the trunk. Daniel's mind screamed for rationality. Empty cruiser. Cold wind. A trick of the storm. He drew his weapon, pressing it against the man's chest. You will not take me, he said, voice trembling. The man leaned closer, whispering. You already answered the first call. Daniel fired. The sound vanished into the storm. Not a crack. Not a bang. Just a nothing. The man remained. The gray eyes fixed on him, unblinking. The smile widened. The cruiser lights went out. Darkness swallowed the road. Then the radio clicked on. Clear this time. Unit 12. Signal confirmed. Daniel staggered backward, realizing that the GPS, the road, even the storm itself had become irrelevant. His position, his control, even his perception of time had collapsed. He could feel it then, the inevitability, the rotation of winter shifts before him, stretching endlessly. Officers before him had succumbed in different ways. Some broken silently, some screaming into radios that never answered, some vanishing into the storm entirely. And yet, the same pattern persisted. The man rose from the seat, no longer bound by flesh entirely, merging with shadows cast by snow-laden trees. His voice was everywhere now, emanating from the radio, the wind, the snow itself. You cannot leave. You are here. You are listening. You always will be. Daniel ran toward his cruiser, but the door would not open. Time warped again. The trees leaned inward, crushing the road, and the snow seemed solid, resisting every step. He turned, saw himself reflected in the windshield, but his reflection moved out of sync. Another Daniel, eyes wide in terror, mouth opening to scream. The sound came from everywhere at once. Stop! I. His own voice dissolved into static. The other figure stepped closer, passing through the glass as though it weren't there. The man from the cruiser leaned over, voice soft, intimate, a whisper directly into Daniel's mind. Winter doesn't forgive. Winter doesn't forget. Winter chooses. Daniel fell to his knees, every instinct screaming to run, to fight, to resist. The radio, now embedded in his skull, replayed the breathing, the whispers, the calls of officers long gone. His hand trembled over the holster again. He fired blindly. Nothing changed. The shots made no sound. They had no effect. The air thickened. The snow stopped falling. Silence. Then a single breath in his ear. Daniel realized in a clarity more horrifying than the storm itself that he had never been in control. He had only been answering the call. The world condensed to one point. Him, the radio, the man, the storm. Then it expanded, stretching infinitely, repeating. North route. Mile marker 17. Winter shift. Breathing. Answering. Daniel screamed. Not a shout into the storm, but a scream that echoed in the chamber of his own mind. The last thing he saw was his reflection, perfectly still, smiling. And the radio, soft now, comforting almost. Welcome, Officer Mercer. You are exactly where you belong. Spring came late that year. Or maybe it never came at all. The way winter lingers in places where the snow doesn't just fall, it waits. Roads reopened, county maps updated, patrols rerouted. But North Route, the stretch Daniel had vanished on, remained unofficial. Officers who asked were told it had been decommissioned. The files were classified. The supervisors nodded politely, avoiding eye contact. No one spoke of the winter shift anymore. The station smelled of disinfectant and coffee, a flimsy shield against the memory of frozen roads and whispers in radios. Harlan, the caretaker, had retired quietly, leaving behind the thin folder Daniel had brought back with him. The folder, now locked in the chief's safe, contained only fragments. Photocopied logs, yellowed notes, and officer reports that never fully explained what had happened to those who disappeared. But the story didn't end there. Dispatch still received calls. Sometimes a faint static, sometimes a whisper, almost imperceptible, like someone breathing through the channel. Some of the younger officers claimed they heard their names spoken in the snowstorm, but the veterans didn't laugh anymore. They simply lowered the volume and moved on. Daniel Mercer was never seen again. Officially, he had transferred to another precinct. Unofficially, the cruiser he had driven that last night was found months later, abandoned on the North Route. The engine was cold. The door hung open. The radio inexplicably still worked. No footprints surrounded it. No tracks led away. The snow around the vehicle had drifted into smooth white waves, as if the road itself had swallowed whatever had been there. Sometimes, at the dead of night, new officers reported the same sensation Daniel had felt. The feeling of being watched, of snow pressing in from every side, of radios awakening on their own. Static that resolved into breathing. A voice calling their name softly, familiar and intimate. Some swore they had glimpsed figures standing at the edge of the tree lane, human-shaped shadows frozen in impossible positions. They blinked, turned, and the figures were gone. The only evidence that remained were the radios, left on, alive, waiting. Weeks later, a rookie named Callahan walked North Route during a blizzard. His cruiser headlights cut through the heavy snow. He thought he saw footprints beside the road. Deep, deliberate, bare feet. He followed them for a moment. Then they stopped. He turned back. The road was empty, except for the snow, thick and clean, erasing the world behind him. A whisper came through the radio. "Unit 12, you're next." Callahan dropped the mic. His reflection stared back at him from the windshield. He blinked, and it moved out of sync. A pale, gray-eyed figure smiled behind him, leaning close, whispering, "You always come back in winter." He tried to start the engine. Nothing. The snow seemed to harden under the tires. The road vanished into white. Time lost all meaning. And somewhere deep in the forest, a radio breathed. Waiting for the next officer. Waiting for the next shift. Waiting for someone to answer. Winter never truly ends. It only waits. And it always remembers.